Shame is an emotion we all know intimately, yet rarely discuss. It creeps into our thoughts, dictating how we see ourselves and how we interact with the world. But what if shame wasn't just a burden? What if it held the key to understanding our deepest vulnerabilities and unlocking personal growth? In shame, free yourself, find joy, and build true self-esteem. Joseph Burgo invites us on a powerful journey to uncover the many faces of shame. Far from being a simple emotion, shame manifests in ways that shape our lives, whether through perfectionism, fear of failure, or the walls we build to protect ourselves from judgment. Burgo's stories of real people battling their own shame show us that this emotion isn't a sign of weakness, but a call to courage. Through Mark's relentless pursuit of success, Sarah's obsession with perfection, John's paralyzing fear of exposure, and Lisa's struggle to belong, we see how shame shapes our lives in ways we might not even recognize. But more importantly, their journeys reveal how facing shame head-on can lead to transformation. This isn't just a book about overcoming shame. It's a guide to embracing your authentic self. Join us as we delve into the raw, relatable, and ultimately liberating stories from shame, and discover how to turn this universal emotion into a stepping stone for growth, connection, and joy. Are you ready to confront the silent force that's been holding you back? Let's begin. Mark's invisible burden. Mark was the kind of man everyone admired. Sharp suits, a confident walk, and an office with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. To his colleagues, he seemed untouchable, always prepared, always winning. But behind the confident exterior lay a deep secret. Mark often felt like he was living a lie. Every presentation, every deal closed, every handshake brought him closer to a fear he couldn't shake. The fear that someone would one day expose him as an imposter. This gnawing anxiety wasn't just about performance. It was rooted in something much deeper. It was shame, an emotion so well hidden even Mark couldn't fully name it. All he knew was the persistent voice in his head. You're not good enough. You never were. Mark's childhood was far from picture perfect. His parents, though well-meaning, set impossibly high standards. Good grades weren't celebrated, they were expected. Anything less was met with stern disapproval. Mark vividly remembered one moment when he came home, excited to show his father a test score of 95%. His father barely looked up from his newspaper before muttering, "What happened to the other 5%? These moments weren't isolated. They built on each other, brick by brick, forming a wall that separated Mark from his sense of self-worth. At school, he found little refuge. He wasn't the most athletic kid and struggled with his weight in early adolescence. His classmates didn't let him forget it, giving him nicknames that made him dread lunchtime. He learned early on that being vulnerable only gave others ammunition. So Mark decided he would bury it. He wouldn't let anyone see his pain. He told himself, if I can just be successful enough, they'll respect me. They won't see the flaws. But the more he succeeded, the louder the shame grew. Success didn't silence it, it amplified the stakes. The higher he climbed, the further he had to fall. This was the invisible burden Mark carried into every meeting, every negotiation. It wasn't just his struggle. It's a story shared by so many, shaped by early experiences that whisper, "You're not enough." For Mark, the stage was set for a journey he didn't even know he needed. A journey to confront the shame that silently dictated his life. Unmasking the faces of shame. Mark's struggles weren't unique, but shame is a master of disguise. It wears many faces, sneaking into our lives in different forms. Through the lens of Joseph Burgo's work, we meet others whose lives are shaped by this hidden force, each carrying their own version of Mark's burden. Sarah's story. Unrequited love shame. Sarah was the kind of woman who seemed to have it all together. As a single mother, she juggled her job and parenting with impeccable grace. Or so it appeared. Her house was always spotless, her outfits perfectly coordinated, and her Instagram filled with pictures of her radiant smile. But behind closed doors, Sarah was exhausted, lonely, and quietly drowning in a sea of self-doubt. Sarah's life had been marked by unrequited love. In her teenage years, she had fallen hard for someone who didn't return her feelings. Later, in her marriage, she had poured her heart into a partner who never truly saw her, leaving her with a deep sense of inadequacy when the relationship crumbled. Shame whispered in her ear, "You weren't enough for them to love." So Sarah did what many do. She built a fortress. Her outward perfection was her armor, a way to keep the world from seeing the cracks. But every compliment about her picture-perfect life only deepened her loneliness. She yearned for connection, but feared exposing the messiness underneath. John's story: unwanted exposure shame. Then there was John, a young entrepreneur with a growing startup. He was brilliant at what he did, but avoided one thing like the plague: public speaking. For John, the idea of standing on a stage and presenting to an audience was paralyzing. It wasn't the fear of forgetting his lines or fumbling over words. It was the fear of being seen. John's childhood had been filled with moments where he felt humiliated. He remembered being teased in middle school for a stutter that appeared whenever he got nervous. Even after the stutter faded, the fear of being judged lingered. Shame became a shadow that followed him into adulthood. Whenever he thought about stepping into the spotlight, shame whispered, "They'll see you for what you really are. They'll know you're not good enough." So John avoided those situations. He turned down speaking opportunities and stayed behind the scenes, convincing himself he didn't need the spotlight. But deep down, he knew that avoiding these moments wasn't the solution. Mark's struggle: disappointed expectation shame. Mark's story, as we've seen, revolved around disappointed expectations. Despite his outward success, he constantly felt he was falling short of some invisible standard. No matter how much he achieved, the voice of shame asked, "Is this really all you've done?" This type of shame is common in high achievers. It's the gap between what we expect of ourselves and where we think we stand. For Mark, every promotion and accolade fell hollow because he couldn't silence the feeling that he wasn't measuring up. Lisa's pain: exclusion shame. Finally, we meet Lisa, a teenager who always felt like she was on the outside looking in. At school, she watched as groups of friends gathered in the cafeteria, laughing and sharing secrets. She sat alone, pretending not to care. Lisa's shame wasn't about a specific failure or rejection. It was about being excluded, about feeling like she didn't belong. This exclusion shame followed her into adulthood, making her hesitant to join groups or form deep connections. She told herself, "Why bother? They'll never truly include me." Each of these characters shows a different face of shame, but their stories share a common thread. Shame isolates. It convinces us that our struggles are unique, that no one else could understand. It pushes us to hide behind masks, whether it's Sarah's perfectionism, John's avoidance, Mark's overachievement, or Lisa's withdrawal. But Burgo's work reminds us that shame, while painful, is universal. It touches everyone in some way, even if its expression varies. The key to healing lies in recognizing these faces of shame and understanding that they don't have to define us. The cost of shame. Shame doesn't just linger in the background. It seeps into every corner of life, influencing decisions, relationships, and self-perception. Its effects are subtle yet profound, shaping the paths of Mark, Sarah, John, and Lisa in ways they don't fully understand. Mark's story: a life driven by shame. For Mark, shame was a silent yet relentless driver of his ambition. His fear of inadequacy propelled him to work longer hours and chase bigger achievements. Promotions, bonuses, and accolades became his armor against the shame that whispered, "You're not enough." But this constant striving came at a cost. Mark's personal relationships suffered. He had little time for his family, often missing dinners and milestones. His wife grew distant, frustrated by his emotional unavailability, while his children stopped expecting him to show up at school events. Mark justified his absence by telling himself he was providing for them, but deep down, He knew his work had become an escape, a way to avoid facing the feelings he had buried for so long. The irony was that no amount of success could silence the voice of shame. Each victory felt fleeting, and the bar forward enough kept moving higher. The more Mark achieved, the more he feared losing it all, leaving him in a cycle of overwork and self-doubt. Sarah's story, the lonely fortress. Sarah's perfectionism kept her isolated. While her friends admired her seemingly flawless life, Sarah felt disconnected from them. She avoided opening up about her struggles, fearing they might see her as weak or unworthy. This emotional distance left her yearning for intimacy, but unable to bridge the gap. Her shame also crept into her role as a mother. Sarah constantly second-guessed her parenting, comparing herself to other mothers and wondering if she was doing enough. She poured herself into her son's life, but the constant self-criticism left her drained and resentful. John's story, avoiding the spotlight. For John, shame took the form of avoidance. He turned down opportunities to showcase his skills, convincing himself that staying behind the scenes was a strategic choice. But deep down, he knew he was holding himself back. This avoidance wasn't without consequences. His company began to suffer as he delegated key responsibilities to others, missing chances to connect with potential investors or partners. John's employees noticed his reluctance to step forward, and some began to question his leadership. The shame he worked so hard to hide was now affecting his professional success. Lisa's story, the pain of exclusion. Lisa's exclusion shame shaped her social interactions. She avoided group settings, fearing rejection before it even happened. At work, she kept to herself, declining invitations to lunch or after-hours events. Her colleagues saw her as aloof, not realizing she was protecting herself from the pain of feeling like an outsider. This isolation reinforced Lisa's belief that she didn't belong. She longed for connection, but felt powerless to break free from the cycle of shame and withdrawal. The hidden costs of shame. Joseph Burgo explains that shame doesn't just affect individuals. It ripples outward, impacting careers, relationships, and mental health. Left unchecked, shame can manifest in harmful ways. Overachievement. Like Mark, some use work or success to mask their feelings of inadequacy. Perfectionism. Sarah's need to maintain a flawless image isolates her and prevents authentic connections. Avoidance. John's reluctance to face his fears limits his growth and potential. Self-sabotage. Lisa's withdrawal reinforces her loneliness and alienation. Burgo's stories remind us that the cost of shame isn't just emotional, it's also practical. It limits opportunities, strains relationships, and creates barriers to fulfillment. But it doesn't have to be permanent. Turning shame into growth. The turning point in Burgo's work isn't just about recognizing shame, it's about learning how to transform it. While shame can feel like a weight that pulls us down, it also has the potential to be a teacher. By facing it, we can break free from its hold and grow stronger. For Mark, Sarah, John, and Lisa, this journey required courage, vulnerability, and the willingness to confront the truths they had spent years avoiding. Mark's breakthrough. Facing the root of shame. Mark reached a breaking point during an argument with his wife. She accused him of being emotionally absent, more invested in his work than in their family. For the first time, Mark couldn't brush it off. He felt the sting of her words and the fear that his worst nightmare, being a failure as a husband and father, might be true. Instead of burying the pain, Mark decided to explore it. He began therapy, where he unpacked the unrealistic expectations placed on him as a child. He realized that his constant striving wasn't about ambition, but about proving his worth. Through this process, Mark started to challenge the voice of shame. He learned to set boundaries at work and prioritize his family. He discovered that vulnerability, sharing his fears and struggles with his wife, strengthened their relationship. For the first time, Mark understood that he didn't have to be perfect to be loved. Sarah's journey. Letting go of perfection. Sarah's turning point came during a parenting workshop. The facilitator asked the group to share their greatest fears as parents. At first, Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to reveal her doubts in front of strangers. But as she listened to others share their insecurities, she realized she wasn't alone. When it was her turn, Sarah admitted that she often felt like she wasn't enough, not as a mother, not as a woman. To her surprise, the group didn't judge her. Instead, they supported her, sharing similar feelings of inadequacy. This experience gave Sarah the courage to be more open in her friendships. She stopped trying to maintain the facade of perfection and found that vulnerability brought her closer to others. Over time, Sarah realized that her worth wasn't tied to how others perceived her. John's growth. Stepping into the spotlight. For John, the change began with a small step. His mentor encouraged him to take a public speaking course, framing it not as a challenge, but as an opportunity for growth. At first, John was terrified. He stumbled through his first speech, his old fears of judgment resurfacing. But something unexpected happened. The audience didn't ridicule him. They applauded his efforts. Each small success chipped away at his shame. Over time, John realized that his fear of exposure wasn't based on reality, but on outdated beliefs from his childhood. John began accepting speaking engagements, gradually building his confidence. He even shared his story of overcoming shame in one of his presentations, inspiring others who faced similar struggles. Lisa's connection. Breaking the cycle of exclusion. Lisa's breakthrough came when a colleague invited her to a team-building retreat. Her first instinct was to decline. She didn't want to risk feeling out of place. But something in her said, "Try this time." At the retreat, Lisa hesitated to join the group discussions. But as she listened, she realized that many of her colleagues shared insecurities about fitting in. Slowly, she began contributing, finding her voice in the group. This experience showed Lisa that her fear of exclusion was often self-imposed. She began taking small steps to connect with others, saying yes to invitations, sharing parts of her story, and allowing herself to be vulnerable. The path to healing. Joseph Burgo emphasizes that transforming shame isn't about eliminating it completely. It's about understanding it. Shame can be a signal that points us toward areas of growth. The process involves recognizing shame's patterns, identifying how shame shows up in our lives, challenging shame's messages, replacing negative self-talk with more compassionate narratives, embracing vulnerability, finding strength in sharing our struggles with trusted people, reclaiming power, choosing actions that align with our values rather than being driven by shame. For Mark, Sarah, John, and Lisa, these steps were transformative. They learned that shame doesn't define who they are. It's simply a part of their story. By confronting it, they found freedom, authenticity, and deeper connections with themselves and others. The redemption of shame. As the journey of Mark, Sarah, John, and Lisa unfolds, a common thread emerges. Shame loses its grip when authenticity takes center stage. By confronting their fears and vulnerabilities, they each found a new way of living, one grounded in self-compassion, meaningful connections, and a sense of purpose. Mark, redefining success. Mark's realization that his self-worth didn't have to hinge on his achievements changed his life. He began taking evenings off to spend time with his family, rediscovering the joys of being present. His professional life also shifted. Mark no longer pursued success as a shield against shame, but as a way to contribute meaningfully to his team and organization. His relationships with his colleagues improved, and his work-life balance inspired others in his company to reassess their own priorities. In embracing vulnerability, Mark also strengthened his marriage. He and his wife started communicating openly about their fears and dreams, rekindling the connection that had been overshadowed by his shame-driven ambition. Sarah, finding freedom in imperfection. Sarah's decision to let go of her perfectionism allowed her to enjoy life in a way she never had before. She began sharing her struggles with her closest friends, discovering that vulnerability deepened her relationships. As a mother, Sarah learned to forgive herself for mistakes and focus on the love she gave her son. Her new perspective freed her from the constant pressure to compare herself to others. Instead, she embraced the messy, imperfect beauty of parenting. Over time, Sarah became an advocate for authenticity among her friends. Her openness inspired others to let go of their own facades, creating a ripple effect of acceptance and connection. John, leading with confidence. For John, stepping into the spotlight was more than a professional milestone. It was a personal triumph. Each public appearance became a testament to his resilience and growth. John's newfound confidence transformed his leadership style. He began mentoring his employees, sharing his journey with them, and encouraging them to confront their own fears. His vulnerability inspired trust and loyalty among his team, creating a supportive and innovative workplace culture. In his personal life, John became more present and engaged. He no longer avoided challenges or relationships, choosing instead to embrace the risks that came with living fully. Lisa, building a sense of belonging. Lisa's courage to break her cycle of exclusion opened doors she never imagined. She began forming genuine friendships with her colleagues, discovering that her fears of rejection were often unfounded. At work, Lisa's willingness to connect brought her opportunities she had previously shied away from. She joined committees, participated in team projects, and became a valued member of her organization. Outside of work, Lisa found joy in community activities. Whether volunteering or joining social groups, she began to feel a sense of belonging she had long craved. The universal truth: we all carry shame. Joseph Burgo's stories reveal an essential truth. Shame is a universal emotion. While it manifests differently for each person, its impact is profound. Yet, Burgo's message is hopeful. Shame, when acknowledged and understood, becomes a pathway to growth. The journey of Mark, Sarah, John, and Lisa illustrates this beautifully. Each of them faced their shame and emerged stronger, more authentic, and more connected. Their stories remind us that the first step to overcoming shame is recognizing it. The invitation to heal. Burgo concludes that healing from shame isn't about erasing it, but about transforming our relationship with it. By confronting shame, we can reclaim our lives, redefine our narratives, and build a future rooted in authenticity and courage. As we come to the end of this exploration, one thing becomes clear: shame is not a life sentence. It's an opportunity for transformation. Through the stories of Mark, Sarah, John, and Lisa, we've seen how facing shame with honesty and courage can lead to profound growth, deeper connections, and a renewed sense of purpose. Joseph Burgo's shame reminds us that we are not alone in our struggles. Shame is universal, but so is the power to overcome it. By recognizing its influence, challenging its messages, and embracing vulnerability, we can reclaim our lives and step into our most authentic selves. So, as you reflect on this journey, ask yourself, what would your life look like if shame no longer held you back? What possibilities could open up if you dared to confront your fears and embrace your imperfections? If this summary inspired you, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who might need a reminder that they're not alone. Make sure to subscribe to our channel for more transformative insights and hit the notification bell to stay updated. Together, let's continue the journey of growth, connection, and authenticity. Until next time, stay true to yourself and keep moving forward. Thank you for watching.